Welcome, everyone, to What the Force, and welcome to a new episode on The Searchers. And we're going to discuss all about the influence of The Searchers, the movie, on Star Wars. And with me to discuss this movie and hopefully many others is Amy Richau. Welcome back.
Hello. Thank you for having me back.
And people would know you from 365 Days of Star Wars and 365 Days of Star Wars Women. So
yes, this is a big mouthful.
You're known throughout the internet for talking every single day of the year about Star Wars Women.
I know, hard to escape me unless you mute me.
But also something that people might know from listening to our previous episodes is that you do actually have a really big interest in film.
I do. I was a film studies major in college. And I worked in film preservation for many years. And so I helped restore and preserve films at UCLA Film and Television Archive and a couple different film labs, and spent a very brief but very lovely time at Skywalker Ranch at their film archives.
That's amazing.
It was very cool. I wish I would have just hidden there. And stayed.
Looking forward to the Lucas Museum where we can actually go and immerse ourselves in film.
Yes. Of course I am. Yes. No, I'm I could move back to Los Angeles. That would work out.
I really enjoyed doing our last episode, which was on the Hidden Fortress, especially how much Kurosawa's his shots, you can almost see them. When you pair them and look side by side, you can see them kind of influencing Lucas, especially in how he chose to do specific shots for certain scenes to evoke action, etc. But The Searchers specifically seems to have been pulled into Lucas's psyche to evoke kind of different emotions, not just action, which is really cool. So did you want to give us a little bit of a background on The Searchers?
So The Searchers came out in 1956, and it was directed by John Ford, who started directing shorts in 1917 and is really considered one of the best American film directors ever. He was a huge influence on a lot of directors from the 70s, George Lucas being one of them, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese. He had kind of a resurgence of his kind of fame in the 1970s. People watched his films over and over and over again. But by the time The Searchers came out in 1956, he had already won 4 Academy Awards for Best Director, which is, I believe, a record, and a record I doubt will ever be broken. And he was very closely associated with John Wayne and made a lot of different Westerns, Stagecoach 1939 being an early one, and The Searchers in 1956 being a later one. And so it stars John Wayne as Ethan Edwards, Jeffrey Hunter as Martin Pauly, and a young Natalie Wood as Debbie Edwards. And so that is just a little bit. I don't know if you want me to go into plot or...
I can go into plot a little bit. So there is the Edwards family who has a homestead in the middle of Texas. And it is this place kind of in some ways idyllic because of the family unit. And in comes their Uncle Ethan, who has come from the Civil War, which ended 3 years ago. The family has an older daughter, a younger daughter, and a young son, and an adopted, young man named Martin, who was kind of a foundling, very much like Luke, actually. There's kind of a parallel there with the young adopted son, and he is a 8th Cherokee, and that's kind of important to the story because of we have Ethan Edwards, who's the uncle, coming home, and he very much has opinions and, what's the right word for this, Marie-Claire?
Is it that he's racist?
I was going to say bigoted attitudes. Bigoted attitudes towards all of the indigenous population. This movie is fairly hard to watch if you are sensitive to this. So be warned if you go into this, it doesn't necessarily treat the subject matter nicely. It was a 1950s movie, and it kind of it's very much of its time in some ways, and in some ways it is pushing and attempting to push outside of that. What ends up happening is there's a raid that happens. Martin and Ethan Edwards leave to go and attempt to help the local Texas Rangers with that raid and try and figure out what's happening. They realize it's a trap. And if, they were there, then, where else could they have gone? And they end up raiding the homestead, destroying the homestead, just much like the Lars homestead in A New Hope. But this time they actually capture the young girl and take her away. And it becomes a journey of trials in an attempt to have Martin, the young adopted kid, and Ethan Edwards, the obsessed uncle, in an attempt to bring Debbie home. The tricky part of this is John Wayne, who normally would have played, kind of the white knight hero in previous films. In this one, he kind of older now in his roles and what he was playing, ends up playing a very dark anti-hero who has, first his mission is to save her, but once he discovers that time has passed, 5 years passes throughout the course of the movie, so that's a little odd to get used to. He ends up making the decision that kind of through his logic that because she was taken and married off inside of the tribe, that she was now tainted. And so it wavers between his desire to want to kind of purge that taint and kill her, and Martin wanting to save her. And that's where the conflict really lies in the movie, and it's really well done. And I think that that's really what drew kind of an entire generation of directors that have affected cinema even to today, that this conflict between this young kid who wants to save her and this old man who wavers between wanting to save her and wanting to kill her, and take revenge for what happened, is really the driving force of the movie. In the end, the decision is made to bring her home, and he walks off into the sunset, which is interesting. It is very Western, like the shots, the feeling. He has this thing he says that is almost classic. It was incorporated into maybe the 1950s, 1960s vocabulary because of Buddy Holly. That'll be the day. He says that all throughout the movie. So John Wayne's character, Ethan Edwards, and then Buddy Holly and his band, the Crickets, went to go see it, and they made a song about it. That'll be the day. So it's like the movie itself influenced way beyond cinema. It influenced kind of culture of the time. So it was a very important movie, but it, we were talking about before this, it didn't win a lot of awards or anything.
Yeah, I didn't but this, even though he had won Best Director 4 times, The Searchers was not even nominated for any awards, and wasn't a film that I don't think was really celebrated at the time, but was more rediscovered kind of in the 70s. And, it's an interesting film because, its portrayal of Native Americans is they are savages. And if any white woman is around them, they become less than human. And so it's like a favor to kill them because they're gone. They're no longer who they are. They're gone. So that is really obviously not something that is good to, good to see. It also I think that the character of Martin is someone who is the conscience of the film. Yeah. Because when I think about The Searchers, I hadn't seen it for a very long time before we decided to do this podcast. But when I thought about it, I was like, what I remember about it is it's about obsession. It's about a very, very obsessive man who is, John Wayne's character is not likable. Where, he demands your attention. He's he's a very, very memorable character. It is a really great performance by John Wayne, who himself is problematic. If you, what he said in a lot of his interviews, which is extremely offensive, like a man of his time, I suppose you could say, or just a man who didn't think that, people who weren't white were as good as him. It's hard to know. But certainly what he said horrible things in interviews. So, I'm going to take him at his word that he believes that stuff. Oh, but his acting is amazing in this film. He's hard to take your eyes off of, but he is driven by pure obsession. And I think that at first he thinks he is trying to do the good thing where oh no, I'm the hero. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to, this is what I do. Is I go and I save people. But by the end of it, I don't even he's just trying to finish the job, but the way in his way finishing the job is murdering a young innocent girl.
Yeah.
He just becomes so obsessive about this and finding Scar, who is the Native American chieftain who did the raid, that he just loses all sense. I'm not even sure if he had a really strong sense of right or wrong. I mean, because he literally just insults Martin right away for not being 100% white at the very beginning, and so he's a very flawed person, I suppose you could say, but he loses complete sense of right and wrong by the end of it. And then kind of at the very, very end of it, he's like, oh no, I'm not going to kill you, I'm going to hug you. Which is a little, then you're like, oh, okay,
yeah, I think he was just, I think it was he was very much on the edge of wanting to kill her in the end. And he just almost on autopilot, decides to complete his original mission, it was fascinating to watch. I really, really appreciated kind of that internal conflict. And I think that what's really, really important to call out is how influential this movie is. So it is the benchmark that many directors who we consider to be the best of the best, use to basically say, this is obsession, this is revenge, and they view this movie as kind of that lens, and then it not seeps, it directly comes into their work. Taxi Driver is almost like a modern retelling of The Searchers.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really if you can look at different films and how they were, influenced in different ways, the storytelling in it. I was watching a documentary and they were just talking about how, they don't really show the violence, but they show the effect of the violence. And I think that a lot of times you're used to, the violence happening completely off screen, or seeing the violence. But people are getting scalped in this movie, but you never see it. You see the after effects. People have died. Sometimes you do see the bodies, and there's you see, you don't see the people being killed, but then you see their bodies. Sometimes you don't even see that. You just see there's a scene where there's you see a bloody dress.
Yeah.
And they're but then you don't, see it. But that's almost more horrific just to not see it. Cause then your mind kind of wanders. And then also the focus is just more not on oh, I'm going to shock the audience by showing this very violent thing, but I'm going to show the effect it has on the characters and how that drives them and how that, drives through the story.
And you feel the emotions, especially like Martin wanting to see and Ethan preventing him from seeing. You see that and that tension between the two of them. In some ways, Ethan and Martin are, of course, the center of the movie, but they're almost polar opposites in a way that bring kind of this weird balance to the movie, because Martin himself is young and in love and still has his whole life ahead of him and has compassion for people and drive, but doesn't necessarily want to kill everybody that he comes across. He has compassion for many people.
And he has compassion for the Native Americans.
Yeah.
Even when, John Wayne is look, buddy, I wasn't going to tell you this, but one of the scalps that, we saw in Scar's teepee,
that was totally,
that's from your mom. And he's that doesn't change. He's immediately that doesn't change the fact that I don't want you to kill that girl. He
so what? Yeah.
He sees the humanity of everyone. And when he comes, there's a scene where you see you see a Native American village and how the U.S. cavalry has massacred them. There's this, very moving scene with Martin, holding, look by a woman, a Native American woman who had died. And he's why did they do this? And at a time when a lot of people wouldn't even question why, the cavalry wouldn't have killed everyone. Like, of course they killed, like, you're like, oh, of course they killed everyone. But he's really, he's questioning the people around him. He clearly looks up to Ethan, I think. And Ethan wants nothing to do with them at the beginning because he's like, don't call me uncle. Don't call me this,
Well, and he's very much our POV too, right? Like Martin is our point of view. He is experiencing this, and he goes through kind of a very odd hero's journey in it, in that like he comes back and actually like, tries to reinitialize his life, but he's still stuck in the darkness that he needs to go and, go on his journey. And you can map it to a hero's journey. It's neat if you look at it from Martin's perspective, because at the point that he is, kind of just, is in the underworld, he becomes the master of life and death when he kills Scar, because he saves Debbie and kills Scar. It's really, really cool to actually see that. But what's most important is that we as the audience empathize with him.
Absolutely.
And his journey. Yeah. And are like the Ethan, you're going too far, and recognizing that Ethan isn't a heroic figure. And Martin is learning through him on what not to do, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think like he sees that Ethan, who, I think has been talked up as, because Ethan returns and everyone's like, oh my gosh, Ethan's back, our hero, like war hero and everything like that. And I think that then he, realizes that, just because someone is presented to you as a hero and they can do no wrong and they're your elder and everything like that, doesn't mean that you need to follow in their path.
Well, and like he follows him, and he has this really great conversation with his love interest, Lori, where he says, if I'm not there, I'm scared about what will happen. Like, because he really realizes that there is a darkness in Ethan, and that without him there, that darkness will take over.
Yeah.
And he's keeping him... He's like the preventative measure that will keep Debbie alive if all else fails, in his mind, I think.
Right.
Yeah. It's just really fascinating. And I do have this like really kind of cool quote, which is Andrew Sarris in 1978. So this is, again, like a long time, 22 years after The Searchers came out, said... A new generation of directors has been inspired by John Wayne's vengeful quest for a lost niece in Comanche country. And this was from the 25 most memorable cult films of the time. So 22 years after, it is still a cult film in the 1970s. So 1978. And this is, again, just after Star Wars had come out. But already it had influenced Scorsese and Spielberg and Lucas significantly. In fact, they were all between the ages of 11 and 14 when they originally saw it in the theaters. And it really, really seems to affect them. You can go and watch like Scorsese's interviews talking about The Searchers and how like his experience as a 13-year-old kid, and he came in and watched the last half of it and then the whole movie. Like his tale is really interesting to hear.
It is. And I think that what's really important to understand about The Searchers too, and what's worth, even if like, the subject matter isn't interesting to you, is it is one of the most gorgeous movies I've ever seen. Like it is this huge vista, Monument Valley, like gorgeousness. And when we were talking earlier about like similarities between, this movie and Star Wars, like I really feel like all of these wide shots of the vista focusing on the location, having the location, whether it being Tatooine or Hoth or, Jakku, like having the location be a character and like having it be integral to what's going on is just like, that's a huge part of Star Wars to me. And like the location is absolutely like, a character in The Searchers. And if you pause any part of the Searchers, like it's gorgeous. And a lot of Star Wars is the same way too. And the Searchers was in VistaVision, which at the time, which is like a high resolution, like super wide screen.
It's like IMAX of the time.
I mean, it's like, yeah, but I mean, it is like gorgeous, like, you know, to see, like, and I haven't seen it, like, because it's not even like, but like, you know, it had a huge influence on like the kids that saw it at the time, because it just was like this otherworldly kind of, you know,
like you were brought
experience
into the movie because it was just gorgeous, and it never explains like it, like one of the things that like I appreciate about Star Wars, and I saw a lot in The Searchers, is that it allows the cinematography to set up where they are. So you breathe for a moment wherever they're going. They like, you ride in, or you see this panorama of where they are in Monument Valley, which is supposed to be Texas, which it's not, where they film it.
Right.
Like, so, and they go all over the place. They go to New Mexico, and they go, you know, they're way up north because it's snowy. And, you know, there's all of these different things because they're kind of following this Comanche tribe. They're on the trail this whole time. And it's very much like a road of trials. It's very, very thematically appropriate, that it feels like it takes a really long time because they're kind of always on this obsessive search. But wherever they go, they always establish kind of these wide shots, which Star Wars does very well. It breathes for a moment in the movie, and then they say, here's what's happening in this moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, and just the structure and the way that they lay out the story, it really, again, like, even if you're not a Western fan, like, I think it's really interesting. And I mean, it is an interesting influence of Star Wars where, I don't know if you want to get into this right now, but like there are certain sequences like from A New Hope or like in Attack of the Clones that you're like that are like widely called out because you're like, oh, that was absolutely influenced by the Searchers.
Yeah, like we can talk about those shots right now because this, you know, we're kind of talking about the cinematography, but there's specifically the ones that are always called out is the burning homestead. And it's almost like Martin coming over the ridge, seeing the burning homestead, is almost like a direct parallel from a cinematography perspective, shot for shot. You can almost see it be lined. You can watch videos where they like line them up, and it's like, oh, Lucas, that's what you were thinking. But he was trying to evoke, like, I think that feeling of what happened. Of course, you know, in The Searchers, the Ethan Edwards is also there. As well as their other friend who's there. Mose is there.
Yeah.
So like there's three people there, but you know, Martin coming over the hill and seeing the homestead burning, Luke coming home, seeing the homestead burning, looks very, very similar. And like kind of almost the angles and everything like that. The thing that you pointed out before, we don't actually see any of the bodies, whereas in Star Wars A New Hope, we actually do see, you know, Aunt Beru and Uncle Lars. Another tiny thing, there's a Lars homestead as well in The Searchers. So,
No, what I was, when I was watching it again too, I thought it was kind of, and this is probably reaching too far, but I thought it was interesting where like they show, like obviously in A New Hope, you don't see Beru and Owen, like you don't see anything where they know that they're in trouble, that like someone is coming to like, you know, to invade, you know, their home. But in The Searchers, you do, like the family inside the home knows that the Native Americans are coming. They know that they're in trouble, and they try to send Debbie away. And I was like, I meant to look at Rogue One because I was like, I think that they have the same braids, like the same hairstyle, but it reminded me of them sending Jin away, where like they like, because they had a plan for Debbie. It was not a good plan because she immediately got caught. It was like, go hide in the cemetery, like, but like there was no place to hide, and Scar was right there. But like they, you know, like they immediately like took her and were like, you know what to do. Like they knew that someone was coming, and so that reminded me a little bit of Rogue One, even though again, like it had very different means, but like she had like braids and it was like curled up, and I was like, is that what little Jin looked like? Yeah, like in A New Hope you have the bones of Luke's family, and in The Searchers you have a bloody dress, which is also quite horrific to see, which is really almost like just seeing a bloody dress is almost more scary than seeing a body, because it's like it just kind of is really jarring. And then Martin tries to go into the house, but John Wayne's character is like, no, you can't see it. And I know that like several directors, when they talk about this film, say how like if John Wayne, who like was such a heroic, like just otherworldly, huge movie star kind of tough guy, like if John Wayne doesn't want to go back to see what, like is in there, like, then I don't want to either. And how that really, that like, like unwillingness to show you what's going on, but then just showing you the effect of it was just kind of, it was scary.
It was very effective. Yeah. There's also a lot of, the scruffy but charismatic rebel kind of self-serving attitude of John Wayne in this movie that feels very Han-like, and kind of ends up playing out a little bit, with the short temper and the quick, one-liner snap back, and handsome, because like John Wayne was considered to be very handsome even at that age, so there's a lot of things from a similarity perspective with John Wayne, and then the young kid that's kind of like with him.
Yeah, I mean, because John Wayne's character is like, don't call me a hero, don't call me a this, like I did it, anyone would have done it, like just very kind of like,
yeah,
he doesn't want to be praised, he for sure doesn't want to be questioned, like, in any way, like he does not care whatsoever what anyone else in that movie thinks about him. And I don't think that Hannah's the same. Like, I mean, I just like, maybe he cares what Leia says, but like, like there is no person that I think Ethan, Martin gets through to him, I think. Yeah. But like, there's no acknowledgement of that.
No. No. I also think, generally speaking, when we look at Tatooine, so that's like, when we're there for A New Hope, when we're there for
Attack of the Clones,
even like the two kind of riding through the desert, in The Mandalorian, like the feeling of Tatooine is very influenced by the Searchers. Wide shots, seeing, not a lot of movement with the camera, seeing C-3PO walk through the desert, and that like that figure of being lonesome, like you can almost see a shot in the Searchers that's exactly like that, with like a single horseman, I think is walking through or riding through the desert. Just the feeling of loneliness is very pervasive through the Searchers, but also it's something that's quite common when we see Tatooine, except for in the larger cities.
Yeah, I mean, it's so isolated. I mean, in A New Hope, and especially like everything in the Searchers is so isolated. And one of my favorite shots is when John Wayne and then the character Martin are like, they've seen Debbie and now they're kind of away from like that, and they're like having a conversation, and they're right by this big sand dune, and there are so many great sand dune shots in Star Wars, and then Debbie like pops up from out of nowhere and starts running down, and they play this very like joyful music where it's like, oh, she got away, she's escaping, like they're all going to be reunited, but then it's like the shock that she's like, go away. Like, this is my home, go away. But like all of like using of the sand dunes and like people like being positioned in different places and like running up and down and like being hidden by it, like all, I think what you were saying just really, I mean, it does seem like Tatooine, and it does seem like a lot of, The Mandalorian. And I think that, there, you can make a direct, many people have done this before, this is not a new idea, but like the Tusken Raiders, seem like to be an obvious parallel between Native Americans. Like they were there first, they feel like their land, I mean rightfully so, like their land is being encroached upon, and the people who are there now don't see them as human and see them as savages, see them as unworthy even to communicate with in a lot of cases. And if anyone like Anakin, in Attack of the Clones, obviously like never gives up on Shmi, his mom. Like he wants to bring her back. Like there was no way that like
and that scene
he was going to hurt her, like, and so like that's a very kind of different thing. Like the fact that like his obsession to get her back, and like how he goes from like just wanting to save her to then he can't save her because he can't save her. And so then he just like goes on a murder spree. Like, like that obsession, I think, is like a direct, can be a direct parallel because, I mean, John Wayne's character is just so obsessive that like he would completely wipe out that, like he would have wiped out Debbie and everyone there at the end if that's what it took to kind of like close out, that his story. Yeah. But Anakin obviously like was not ever going to hurt he was never going to hurt his mother.
But what's interesting is that that's still within Anakin's character in the end, like especially with Padme and his obsession as he becomes Darth Vader. Like we now know he like literally never gives up on Padme.
No, I mean, like, and he doesn't.
I don't mean to laugh.
Like he's blinded by his obsession.
Yeah,
like he just really, really like. Even when he's directly confronted by Padme, in Mustafar, like she's just like, "Hello, like we can run away. We could be together." Like he really is just so completely blinded by his quest.
Ethan. Very Ethan.
No, I mean it is. Yeah. Like, I mean it's just like obsession that like blinds you. Blinds you to what's going on.
And like those revenge aspects too. It's like revenge on the people that like, who are you revenging anymore? Like you've lost sight of everything because of all of the, almost circling you've done around this thing that you've been obsessed with for so long. Really, really interesting. And I think that's important to take away from you if you watch this movie or if you're kind of just listening to this, is that this has driven an entire generation of, filmmakers who see obsession and revenge and this like dark character, and we're very influenced by Ethan Edwards. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's just really, really important to see that. So the scene where in Attack of the Clones where Anakin is, looking for Padme is like the movie The Searchers in like 10 minutes. Like, so like he heads off to go and find her. He goes and has his little journey where he goes and speaks with Jawas. He's riding through the desert. He does a couple of things. He figures out where they are. And we actually get shots of him on the cliff that parallel from a cinematography perspective very, very closely to seeing Ethan Edwards on the Ethan on the cliff looking over the Comanche village. And it's startling when you see them back to back. So I'll link to a few videos where it actually compares these shots because
those are fun. Those are definitely fun to watch. I think it's also important if you haven't seen The Searchers to understand that the Native Americans who take Natalie Wood's character do not hurt her. Yeah. Obviously you can argue that you shouldn't abduct someone and take them away from their home, but they, they do treat her well when she is living with them. Yeah. And the worst part the worst part of this movie is the treatment of the Native Americans. But the thing that I wish I could change other than that from this movie is it would have been great to have had more of Natalie Wood's character in there because it really goes back and forth on a yo-yo where like they see her, they find her, they reconnect, and she's like, no, you got to go. Like, these are my people. Mm-hmm. Like, you got to go. And as soon as she says, these are my people, Ethan wants to kill her. Right there, he they cut to him, you see his face. It's very similar to like the close up of his face when like there's another scene earlier on where they show white women who were abducted, had spent time with Native Americans, and then have been like rescued by the white man. And they are portrayed as babbling idiots who are like not even human anymore. Like they're like, it's like
women very nicely.
It does not. No, I mean, it's like literally like these women are like playing with like little dolls and like not even speaking any language. Like they're just babbling idiots because they have been, ruined. And like, and Ethan says, like they're not white anymore. Like they're gone. Yeah. And like they show this like close up of his face. And then that mirrors when Natalie Wood's character says,
these are my people. Yeah. You should go.
And Martin immediately has to like stand, like put his body in front of her and Ethan,
because Ethan's
protect her, but
gonna hurt her. Yeah,
and then it's like, well, why are you even? If she doesn't want to come back, like, are you like? what do you do? I mean, like, and I actually think that's complicated because like if someone has been taken, like you want it to be their choice, but like, like ideally, like you kind of bring her home and then be like, what do you want to do? Like, do you want to go? Do you want to stay? Like, what do you want to do? There's no conversation with her. And then when at the end, when they see her again, then she's like, oh no, you're here. Yay, let's go home. Which is a complete reversal.
So that scene like is very odd for me because she sees Martin and I think she's happy to see Martin. I don't know that she's necessarily happy that Martin kills, Scar, her husband.
Well, she screams when she sees Scar, but like I don't know if Scar has like a weapon, which I mean would make sense because they don't show Scar. That's what's like that's one of those great is like you see like you don't even see Scar's face, but you know that when Martin is shooting, you know that it must be Scar.
And he has a scar. That is why he's named Scar, by the way. And it's a very like Anakin, or it's a very Kylo Ren scar. Like it's like
I think that the actor who plays Scar is also German, which is
like it's
questionable.
Yeah, he has very blue eyes, by the way, so it's very startling. So like he actually has a scar, and it's very like Kylo Ren in a way, like because it's across his forehead and down across his eye and across his cheek. And in that moment, like I think she just realizes she has no place to go. Because like he kills Scar and then she's like, well, where am I supposed to go now? So she tries to like stay with Martin, I think, or she escapes, and then she escapes because she's like, where am I going to go? And then
they somehow get separated because then she's like running away from Ethan.
And then she's running away from Ethan because Ethan is now like, I'm going to kill you. Which is just,
that scene is like he's trying to catch a cow that has gotten away from the herd. Like he's on his horse chasing after her. Like he's gonna like lasso her and tie her down. And she, and right into the last minute, like it really seems like it might go.
Well,
wrong.
like and when he picks her up, so he like at the end he captures her. There's like this canyon type cave, and he like picks her up, and it's like. He almost like shakes her, and then he like makes this split second decision to like bridal carry her.
Well, and like he like lifts her up so high, like you wouldn't lift up a woman that high.
Yeah, like, it was like
you lift up a little girl. It's like he saw that he like saw the little girl in her that he knew before, she was abducted. Like it's so high, and then like it is like I'm just gonna carry. It's like he's like pretending that she's back to this like. Little girl. He decided to kind of block out, the last couple of years, which are to him still, I'm sure,
very fresh.
Illegal. Like you can't, recover from it.
Well, and like he kind of shakes her, and I think that was like this is still the little girl moment, and it's all just played out without words, which is beautiful. With a little bit of Martin screaming "Ethan" in the background.
Martin the entire time is like running behind the horse, being like, "Don't kill her,
shirtless."
Yeah, I know he is shirtless.
I think he was trying to sneak into the village.
He did sneak into the village shirtless. Yeah, actually, I watched that scene later, and I was like, "Why is his shirt off? He's got a shirt. He's carrying it." Just for fun.
And so like I think this is just really interesting because captivity narratives, which we have actually quite a bit of account for from white women who were captured, primarily for ransom because. Especially colonialists and settlers were willing to pay the, indigenous population that captured their women to get their women back and be like, don't taint them, but, bring them back. So it was like almost a commodity to capture these women. And I watched, this is the rabbit hole I went down to on the last 2 days, which was, doing research into, okay, what happened and how did this narrative come to this place and what was being said by the searchers and then what is being said by George Lucas by using these things, especially, the use of the Sand People, the Tusken Raiders, the similarities between that, but then also not having the raids that ended up happening in New Hope be done by the Tusken Raiders necessarily, but actually by the Empire, the colonialists. The colonialists destroy the homestead, which would be, like the army, basically. destroying the homestead and the searchers, which is a very big change. And so, many people agree that this story is based on the actual kidnapping of 9-year-old Cynthia Ann Parker, who was captured by Comanche warriors and, in Texas in Fort Parker. And 24 years later, she was quote unquote rescued by the Texas Rangers and her uncle. And he was obsessed and spent his life and fortune trying to bring her back. In the end, they killed her husband, who is now part of the tribe. And she had 2 sons and a daughter. And she ended up kind of being a victim of both sides of this conflict in the end. And like her son ended up becoming a very important chief, very famous chief. Now there's actually there's a very good book that came out all about this that actually has accounts of how this story sort of transformed into myth and then was made into a book itself that then The Searchers was based on.
Wait, I think that the idea of saving a young girl from someone who's stolen her is such that's a good story. What could go wrong there? Of course you're going to want to return that girl, it seems like a good guy, bad guy thing, but then it's just, it can get complicated
classic in our psyche, because it's Odysseus, right? Trying to go to Troy to rescue Helen of Troy.
Well, none of the women in The Searchers have any say in anything.
Yeah.
Debbie is she's there, she's hiding, she gets captured, she says she wants to stay, they keep trying to get her, and then she thinks she's gonna die, and then she does get returned, and she does in the end seem happy she's getting returned, but there's a woman who wants to get married and is just constantly waiting, and then she's going to get married up to somebody else, and then but her whole storyline is who is she going to marry, and that the fact that she's waiting and has no control about if the men in her life are going to leave for potentially years, and what can she do, and you're basically you're a girl, you're a wife, or your mom, and there's nothing that women are doing that is changing the story. They're just kind of features of the story.
Well, and one of the important things that many people have pointed out, both Glenn Frankel, who wrote The Searchers, The Making of an American Legend, which covers kind of the story, the real story, the mythology around it, and then how it kind of came to be The Searchers. I think it's just a really important book to understand, because it's how this conversation almost transformed because of the fear of what could happen to our women is almost pervasive in the culture, and how that kind of transformed to these we've got to get her back. And I'm not saying that this story is not new, but in many ways it's also the story of Leia, right? She's the captive in, we've got to go and rescue her. She's the captive in A New Hope. But also this narrative plays out probably because of the parallels that A New Hope has with TFA, or TFA has with A New Hope. It plays out in TFA, this narrative of a bad guy has captured the young girl, and we got to get her back. And we end up having, our older mentor and our young kid, Han and Finn is obsessed with getting her back and keeping her alive. And Han is okay, I got to do what's right. But then once he discovers who's taken her, his obsession changes to Kylo Ren, right? So it's just really interesting that this narrative still has an undercurrent in our culture, the damsel in distress narrative.
Right. It's it's been around for a long time. It'll probably be around, for a long time, at least with it was nice that Rey, like, and Leia to some extent, like Leia certainly played a part in saving herself. She didn't get herself out of the actual cell for the detention block, but she got them out of the block. And Rey saved herself, and then it was like, hey, like,
yeah,
finds him in the hallway, like,
Yeah, it's like, hey, what's going on? So it's certainly changing and different. What ends up happening is, like, we don't get the full story in the legend, right? We get the, the good guys were saving the day. We don't get the full story in the in the book that The Searchers is based on. But The Searchers itself plays a little bit more with the grays associated with both sides. What
Absolutely.
We've already talked about, right? And so even though maybe it wasn't executed as well as it could be done, this was a big step for Ford to actually, and this is what you'll hear when these directors talk about The Searchers, is that this was so different, to kind of say that what the hero of my childhood is doing might not be 100% good, and his motivations might not be perfect. And
right.
There's a lot of gray.
Just showing these deeply, deeply, flawed men. Like, I mean, it is really like, it's I was very pleased that I really had it in my mind that, like, the last time I'd seen The Searchers, that I was so impressed with it. And I was a little like, okay, I hope when I see it again, it's not gonna, disappoint me. But it really is just like the way that it's, put together. The cinematography is amazing. The way that, the camera just kind of like sometimes sits there and like everything kind of like plays out. Like, he doesn't like do crazy things with the camera, like crazy angles and swooping dollies and stuff like that. He really just kind of, makes it more like where you feel like you're there.
Yeah, I just, like, I asked myself, as this like person that I was like going down the rabbit hole, I'm like, the cinematography obviously is something that like drew these directors who have this eye for this, and were very impassioned by the art of cinematography, and trying to get things pictured on film and convey certain things with visuals, especially. The music is in some ways kind of whimsical. There's a point where Laurie's being courted by another guy, and he plays Skip to Maloo, and then the music itself, as they go to a cut to go to the next scene, like a transition, you hear Skip to Maloo in the music.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So like in some points it's whimsical, and yet sometimes it's scary.
Well, it's a dark story, and I think that having music that like does that, or like it does a pretty good job of having comedic moments. There's some like smaller characters that kind of bring a little bit of element of humor to be.
Yeah,
it's a dark story.
It's a very dark story, and then there's like the fight at the wedding.
I know that's all just
very yeah, it's like very comedic in some ways. Like it almost feels like it goes back and forth, and I was like, okay, so what is it about this movie that really is influencing like all of our cinema, like so much of our cinema going forward? What is it about it? And I think it's just, it was so different than the movies and almost the cultural coding that had happened in the cinema from these directors, like the directors that they had been seeing before this, that it was almost like it kind of snapped them out of, hey, you know what? Actually, something could be different. And this character is so significantly different than anything I've ever seen John Wayne do. And I think it just kind of really, and the cinematography is beautiful and extremely breathtaking. I think that was it. And I think that George's choices, especially in A New Hope, and kind of the changes from the character motivation to like, the bad guys are the colonials, the army, the people that are supposed to protect the homesteaders. the bad guy ends up being the hero, like the hero ends up being the bad guy, you know, even more so than what happened with Ethan Edwards Ethan Edwards in, you know, the raid on the village. Anakin ends up, pure boy Anakin ends up doing this really horrific and going further. It's like George decided to kind of take these concepts and say, you know what, maybe I can question them. And almost like if we were to view Tatooine in The Mandalorian as like trying to correct, you know, a perception of what indigenous people could be like. It's like, you know, if Dave Filoni, who directed and wrote that episode, was trying to say like, you know, hey, you know, this is what we took from the Searchers before. There was that you know, little tat-a-tat where they sold some stuff and they got some information. Maybe we could actually make it like a valuable exchange and do it differently. Because it's like each of these exchanges is almost different and it means something different to the characters and it says something different than what happens in the Searchers. And it almost like says something more powerful. George managed to take it and make it different and more powerful. It's really interesting.
I mean, because like The Mandalorian is like, you know, it's, you know, like he comes in, he's obviously like the main character of The Mandalorian, but like, you know, you don't know very much about him. Like you hear kind of conflicting information about him. Like, is he a good person? Is he a bad person? And I think that that's one of the things that is enjoyable about that is not knowing exactly how to feel about him, especially near the beginning until he becomes, you know, Baby Yoda's dad. And then you're like, oh no, he's fine. But, you know, I think that for the Searchers, like I think for most movies, you feel the way you're supposed to, you know how you're supposed to feel about every single scene of a movie as you go along. You just kind of follow it along. Most people have the same feelings about the characters, like this person's good, this person's bad, or like these people, I want them to get together, they're in love, or like there's like, you know, they're going to do this heist and they're doing this. And in the Searchers, you're just really conflicted a lot of times about how to feel about what's going on, and
it really challenges.
I feel like
audience.
I'm coded to feel like this, especially since it's John Wayne, especially since it's John Ford, and you know a lot of people had seen so many of their other films, and you're just like, wow, like you know, I don't know what to feel about this. Like I'm not sure how I'm supposed to feel about this. Like it's the entire thing is played out as like a heroic, happily ever ending with like he walks out the door, who knows where he's going, he doesn't even have a horse, I don't think, he's just like literally walking out. It's like he's walking out into Tatooine without like any kind of form of transportation. And like then they close the door and you're inside, and then it's kind of like, you know, like a book closing. It's like very like almost a fairy tale kind of ending.
Well, because like the movie starts with the door opening and you see the
that's
vista.
One of the most, that is one of the most gorgeous shots too. Like, I mean, she opens the door and you see outside, and I was like, oh my God, this is why I think this movie is beautiful. Like, it is so beautiful.
Yeah. And then it closes again. And after kind of like, there's these happy reunions, I would say Debbie is less happy, but she almost doesn't
she's
really
in shock.
yeah, like she literally doesn't even know what's happening. She's like, I thought I was gonna die and now I'm here. After riding for like 40 miles, I think was the distance they originally stated when they left the first time, so it's probably that much, but 40 miles is like not a small amount of distance on horseback.
Wait, and everyone else is shocked too, because I think that like it's not, you know, if women disappeared, like, I don't think that they normally came back.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it really, like, I mean, the scene is extremely disturbing earlier on when they show, like, a couple girls who are, like, maybe, like, teenagers, and then they show, like, you know, a couple women who are just, you know, again, just, like, completely, like, they're like infants, you know, like, they've completely lost their ability to communicate as, you know, a regular kind of person. I think that they're like in a jail kind of an area where like the sheriff found them and they're kind of like hanging out in the sheriff's office or something like that. But like, you really just wonder like what happened to them? Like, cause it didn't seem like they were going to go home.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you read Debbie's face, you know, she's lost twice. And I think that comes through. The only one who seems semi-okay to come home is Martin. Because he comes home and Lori is there waiting for him.
Yeah, and that is the happy part of the ending, is that they can now be together.
Yeah, like you're supposed to identify with Martin this whole movie and see like, okay, you know, he's finally done what he needed to do and he can exist and grow up and get out of his kind of adolescent journey life and become a man. Like that was his threshold that he needed to go through.
And thank goodness that character is there. Otherwise it would have been like 3 times as dark.
Yeah. I think that like people often refer to like the darkest part of the movie being that you know, they find a dead buried Comanche man, and he Ethan, they uncover him, and Ethan decides to shoot his eyes out because then he has to wander and he can't like go on to kind of his afterlife. It's very dark because it's like, you know, it's described as like saying, well, Ethan cares so much about revenge that he's willing to take it past death.
Yeah, and you realize that, like, I think if you were even kind of identifying with them up until that point, that's like, oh, like, you know, whoa, like, what is going on? Like, that was extreme. Like,
yeah.
And hopefully at that point you start not identifying with him so much.
Well, and I have this really good quote from, again, Glenn Frankel, who wrote, you know, the book all about kind of the myth behind it. But he said, Ford understands that creating myths and depicting myths is important, but he was also about giving you myths and then undercutting it. That's why The Searchers, to my mind, is a great film. So it's like he gave the myth, but then he ended up inserting a bit of the truth back into the myth, which is just really cool to think about.
Well, I mean, as soon as I didn't have time to rewatch it, but as soon as I watched it earlier this week, I was like, oh man, I just want to watch it again. Like, and I always feel like that, mm-hmm. like, I feel that way with that movie because like there are little parts in it that like when you watch it again, like it takes on different meanings because like there are some, you know, twists and turns in this movie. Like there are things that people say, there are shots that kind of get mirrored that, you know, mm-hmm. make it a very, there's a reason why Steven Spielberg watches this movie a lot.
Yeah.
And it's because there's a lot to find in it.
Like from a symbolic perspective, Ethan is, and this is played out in so many cool ways. So Ethan is the person that found Martin. So he is like his father. He is denying him his like, you know, that familial feel through the whole movie until almost the end when he's like, I'm going to die. So I bequeath you everything. And Martin's like, I don't want your stuff. I just want you to like not kill Debbie.
Yeah, just don't kill Debbie.
I don't want anything because Debbie's actually like your flesh and blood. I would like her to live. So, but that's really interesting because that's part of the story is to say, you know, you have to understand where you come from and you have to understand all of the darkness and all of the things underneath who you are. And through the course of the story, Martin understands darkness and he understands what is right and he understands compassion and he chooses compassion again and again and again and again, mm-hmm. except with Scar, who he is in his mind, I think, defending Debbie. So
yeah, no, I think that like they don't show Scar with the weapon, but since you know Debbie screams and she clearly sees Scar, like I imagine he did have a weapon, mm-hmm. And so I think that in his mind it was more
defense of Debbie.
But like I don't think he would have I don't think he did attempt or would have attempted to kill anybody else. And I think that if Martin would have been in charge of everything, he would have snuck in there, grabbed Debbie, left. And none of what happened afterwards, the violence that happened afterwards would have even happened.
Yeah.
Like, because he didn't want to kill anyone. And he was mad when he saw that the U.S. cavalry had killed people like, mm-hmm. And so like he really is kind of, you know, he's an outlier,
yeah.
in the film.
Yeah. What's cool is like we have Ethan, who represents this older generation and this, older way of thinking. And we have Martin, who represents the kids that are growing up and are trying to learn from it. And, the older generation is trying to, do what I say, not what I do. And so in so many ways, Martin learns what not to do through Ethan. It's, I don't know, it's just really cool. And it, in some ways, like, we have a lot of the Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker relationship. Like, it's just,
well, it's interesting because it's kind of like, it's not a master and Padawan relationship in the Searchers, because like Ethan like is like not wanting to teach anyone. Certainly Martin doesn't want to learn anything from him, and he just like, they're both kind of rejecting each other, but they both decided to go on this kind of, this quest.
But there is that father and son like symbolic relationship because, Ethan is the one that saved him. Ethan is the one that made sure he had a family and a place to live. And then he went off to war. And then, he's also still this kid that he cares about and is willing to. And in so many ways, Ethan is saved by the fact that Martin has been, convinced he will choose the right path if he is there. And that's very Luke and Darth Vader,
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's intentional, but it's just really interesting to see it play out and then be like, oh, hey, these themes, these thematic elements of, this cursed father figure it plays out on screen.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It's a good one.
It's a good one. Yeah. So I highly recommend you watch it. There is, of course, some warnings associated with it. It is very much of its time. It might be hard for some people to watch. I tweeted about it earlier today when we recorded and, or we were going to record and I was like talking about The Searchers and people were like, I remember being mad at this movie. and like, I totally get it. There are things that are kind of, hard, but I think it's also important to understand how much of an influence it has had and how, the cinema and the movies that we love, to this day and the directors that we're like, oh, these people are masters, draw and parallel and still play an homage to The Searchers.
Yeah, and I would say that if you are turned off by violence, it doesn't show a lot of violence, but it definitely does hint at a lot of it. And so like we talked about like, getting eyes shot out of a corpse, there, you see scalps, you see you don't see someone getting scalped, but you see like, people.
Oh, Ethan is about to at one moment, then it cuts away.
He does cut away. But then you see him holding it afterwards. Yeah. And so you definitely know that he did do that. But it doesn't show stuff, but it definitely does kind of, you get the sense of the horror of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just, hey, if you want to understand how to present revenge and obsession on screen, John Wayne in The Searchers is amazing. If you want to see how to have a POV that shows compassion, even kind of ahead of his time, Martin in his role, it just, that role shows compassion and love incredibly well.
Yeah, and also just like using your location in like the best way possible, where like,
how to establish a location. How to establish
a location as character. Like, I mean, because it is, there's a lot of movies that have been made around there, but like this one is the best. It's the prettiest. Like it is, It really is just stunningly gorgeous.
Yeah, I agree. Any other thoughts on The Searchers?
I don't think so. Now I just need to look up Young Jin's hair.
And be like,
I know did they have the same hairstyle? I mean, who cares?
She had
really?
two pigtails.
Like,
yeah, she had two. No,
I feel like I know. I'm gonna look. It's gonna now bother me. They both have little dolls too.
Yeah,
I did notice
little dolls.
Yeah. So that's like my random like doesn't mean anything. No one was influenced by it thing, but like it's something I noticed.
Well, like to say like I don't think TFA like the parallels are purposeful at all. I just think that there's a lot of, like, because they had a female protagonist who gets captured, it ends up playing out, you know, in parallel because of, you know, who's going after her and she's captured. Like, it ends up having that captivity narrative. Oddly enough, I think it's just really interesting because it's a very male gaze view of those situations, and it's like in The Searchers specifically, like very like,
yeah, I mean, like
women don't have power. Yeah,
no, and like they don't have fully drawn characters.
Yeah,
at all. Like, I mean, that's not what this movie is. Like, if that, you know, so if you need that to enjoy a movie, like, which is, you know, this is not it.
Yeah, read the summary of it, maybe. But, you know, other than that, it has a lot going for it, and it is still really, I would say, valuable to understand, especially how much it has influenced Western media in general. Yeah, and specifically Star Wars through George Lucas. Well, Amy, this was fun.
Yes.
Yeah. So where can people find you if they are looking for you out there on the internet?
So my website is 365starwars.com, and you can find me on Twitter at 365_Star Wars if you want just the content that I write, or if you want some more of my added opinions. I am much more active on my personal account, which is just AMY RICHAU, my name, Amy Richau. So that is where I am.
Well, thank you for coming on and talking about The Searchers with me. I don't know what we should do next. There's so much. I feel like maybe we should take on like one of the World War II movies that influence kind of like the bombing sequence or the bombing runs. Because I think that would be good. There's also Metropolis, which is like one of my favorite movies. So that would be like a guilty pleasure episode for me. You know, we could also do something along the lines of Rashomon to talk about kind of Ryan and how he specifically brought that into.
Right. Yeah, there's all kinds of good options.
The Last Jedi. But we're going to continue on our cinematic, try to maybe get a couple more in this year rather than once a year. Just so busy. But no, I think that would be really great to do. We specifically wanted to see if there's any influences in the Mandalorian, and so we didn't end up going about that one right away. But yeah, this was always going to be our next one because it was really interesting to take a look at from a Western perspective. So, yep. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music composed by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We'd like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force. Melody, Night Huntress, In Wild Space, Susan, Jessica, Brad, Anna Perez, Macau Mom, Neil, and James. Make sure you like and subscribe on your podcast app of choice or on YouTube. Leaving a 5-star review on iTunes helps other people find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at What the Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, or on our website, whattheforce.ca. We also have a new Discord. Links are available in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.